She had 15 years of experience spotting fraud. She told me that herself twice while she was tearing my mother's surgery money into confetti on the bank lobby floor. 15 years, and she still got it wrong. My name is Frank Miller. I'm 44 years old. I grew up in Cleveland Heights back when it was still a neighborhood full of men who wore heavy steel-toed boots and earned every dollar with grease on their knuckles. 3 months ago, I walked into the main branch of Great Lakes Trust on Euclid Avenue, wearing my faded work jacket and holding a certified cashier's check for $5 million. The branch manager looked me dead in the eye and told a room full of staring strangers that I was a scam artist. The branch manager was my ex-wife, Victoria. You'd think after 12 years of marriage, she'd at least recognize my signature on a corporate ledger. But if I start with the bank lobby, you won't understand why I just stood there and took her insults. You'll think I was weak. So let's turn back the clock. Let's go back to a cold Sunday dinner in the spring of 2011, at a polished mahogany table I didn't belong at, in a house that was never mine. Victoria's parents lived out in Moreland Hills, in one of those sprawling brick mansions with a circular cobblestone driveway and gas lanterns that burned day and night. Her father, Gerald, made his fortune in commercial real estate across Cuyahoga County. Her mother, Beverly, made her living simply by marrying Gerald. Her sister, Jessica, had married a corporate attorney named David, a guy who wore silk ties on weekends just to watch golf on television. I pulled my silver Ford F-150 into their drive, parking its rusted wheel wells right behind Jessica's brand new Audi. My truck had 180,000 miles on the odometer, and the check engine light had been glowing red on the dashboard for so long I had started thinking of it as a permanent decorative fixture. Dinner always started out fine. Gerald would say a short grace over the silverware, Beverly would pass the porcelain bowl of green beans, and everyone pretended to be civilized. But somewhere between the second glass of expensive Cabernet and the dessert nobody actually asked for, Gerald would turn his eyes toward me. It was that specific look a wealthy man gives you when he's already decided what you're worth and is just asking questions for sport. "So, Frank," Gerald said, setting his heavy silver fork down with a deliberate tap, "how's that little machine shop coming along over in Cleveland Heights? Still fixing other people's broken scrap?" I chewed my steak slowly. I swallowed. I took my time before answering. "Fixing machine parts pays the electric bill, Gerald. Building custom precision components is where the future is." Gerald chuckled, shaking his head as if I'd said something sweet and naive. "Building's for guys with capital, Frank. Maintenance is just treading water." "He's actually doing great, Dad," Victoria's voice chimed in quickly. But her tone wasn't proud. It was sharp, embarrassed, and tense. She wasn't embarrassed for me. She was embarrassed of me. There is a massive difference, and if you've ever felt it in a room full of in-laws, you know it stays in your chest forever. Jessica leaned over her crystal wine glass, a cruel little smirk playing on her lips. "At least Frank's working, Dad, even if it's not, a real corporate career, a real career." I had started Miller Precision in a rented garage off Cedar Road with a rusted, second-hand lathe I bought off an old machinist who was going out of business. I slept 4 hours a night on a cot behind the tool racks for 2 straight years. By year 5, I had 12 skilled machinists on my payroll. By year 8, we were turning over revenue numbers that would have made Gerald choke on his vintage wine if I'd ever bothered to brag about them. But I kept my mouth shut. Why hand ammunition to people who are already looking for a reason to shoot? I looked across the table at Victoria, waiting for the smallest gesture, a gentle touch on my knee beneath the tablecloth, a quick word to defend her husband's sweat, anything. Instead, she looked straight down at her plate, meticulously cutting her chicken into tiny, unnecessary pieces. That was the exact moment I realized a bitter truth. It wasn't just her wealthy family who looked down on my grease-stained hands. Victoria believed them. She thought I was lesser, too. The real knife in the back came after dessert. I stepped into the dimly lit hallway to use the restroom, walking past Gerald's wood-paneled study. The heavy oak door was propped open an inch. Inside, Gerald and David were pouring pours of scotch from a crystal carafe, laughing quietly. "I give that shop 2 more years before the bank forecloses," Gerald said, tossing a $100 bill onto his leather desk. "Frank's in over his head. I'll bet you $1,000 right now he's bankrupt before 36. David laughed, tossing his own 100 onto the desk to match it. "You're on, Gerald. He doesn't have the stomach for real commerce." As I stood frozen in the dark hallway, Victoria walked up behind them. She didn't scold her father for gambling on her husband's failure. She didn't slam the door in disgust. She simply looked at the 2 crisp $100 bills on the desk, let out a soft, amused laugh, and took a quiet sip of her wine. She was in on the joke. I turned around, walked back out to my F-150 with the check engine light glaring red, and drove home in silence. The marriage wasn't killed by a sudden explosion. It died right there, suffocated by the cold indifference of a woman who had already budgeted for my defeat. After that Sunday dinner in Moreland Hills, the marriage didn't end with screaming matches or slammed doors. It eroded slowly, the way a steel beam rusts from the inside out when moisture gets trapped beneath the surface. Between 2011 and 2018, I poured my entire soul into Miller Precision. I worked 18-hour shifts, sleeping on a cot in the shop office, taking on high-tolerance defense contracts and aerospace fittings that required precision down to a fraction of a millimeter. The money began coming in, real, substantial money, but I kept the corporate ledgers quiet and separate. Why share financial milestones with a woman who had already celebrated a $1,000 bet on my downfall? Meanwhile, our home life turned into a cold, suffocating routine. I would come home late at night, my hands smelling of cutting fluid and grease under my fingernails, only to find Victoria sitting on the sofa with her work laptop, managing accounts for Great Lakes Trust. She wouldn't ask how my day was. Instead, she'd drop subtle, poisonous comparisons into the conversation. Jessica's husband, David, just got promoted to senior regional partner. She'd say without looking up from her screen, her voice dripping with calculated disappointment. They're building a pool behind their house in Chagrin Falls. Must be nice to have a career where hard work actually translates into status. I'd stand there in my work boots, exhausted to the bone, and take it. She viewed my grease-stained shirts as an embarrassment, a stain on her social standing among her banking peers. To Victoria, success wasn't measured by building an honest business from the ground up. It was measured by country club memberships, silk ties, and corporate titles. By the summer of 2018, she decided she was done waiting for me to fail on her schedule. She filed for divorce. Her lawyer was a ruthless corporate attorney in a $1,000 suit who acted like he was seizing assets from a bankrupted contractor. My lawyer was an old high school buddy named Frank Kowalski, who operated out of a small office near the rail line and handled the paperwork for the price of a transmission repair on his truck. We sat across a polished mahogany conference table on the 12th floor of a downtown building. Victoria sat with her arms crossed, her jaw set like stone, looking at me like I was a stranger who had overstayed his welcome in her life. "I want the suburban house," she stated flatly. "I want primary physical custody of Ethan, and I want full child support. I don't want this dragged out in court, Frank. I want to move on." Kowalski leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Frank, you've got the capital now. You've got a rock-solid case. Don't just hand her the house and sign away your life. Fight her." He was right. By 2018, Miller Precision was generating numbers that would have made her father's jaw drop. But I looked across that table at the mother of my 11-year-old son. I thought about Ethan, sitting in his bedroom at home, terrified, asking me if his parents hated each other. I wasn't going to drag my boy through a bitter legal war just to prove a point to a woman who had never valued me. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed over the deed to the house, agreed to her custody terms, and finalized the papers. Victoria looked at the signed documents, then looked up at me with a cold, rehearsed expression. "You're a good man, Frank," she said, her voice completely devoid of warmth. "But good isn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Good isn't enough." 12 years of marriage boiled down to 5 words. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment off Butler Street in Cleveland Heights, 2 blocks from where my father's old shop used to sit. I paid my child support payments a week early every single month without fail. I never missed one of Ethan's soccer games. I sat in a folding chair on the visitor's sideline in freezing Ohio rain, clapping louder than anyone else, while Victoria sat on the home side with her new banking executive boyfriend, pretending I didn't exist. The true cruelty of her materialism revealed itself 2 years later when Ethan turned 14. He had made the elite regional hockey team, a dream he had worked toward for 3 straight years. But high-end goalie gear was expensive, nearly $3,000 for a full custom set. When Ethan asked his mother for help, Victoria flatly refused. She told my 14-year-old son that he needed to learn the value of money and forced him to wear tattered, ill-fitting, second-hand pads that left his knees bruised after every practice. 3 days later, I watched her walk out of a luxury boutique at the Beechwood Mall carrying a $4,000 designer handbag. When Ethan came to my apartment that weekend, trying hard not to cry as he showed me his worn-out gear, my blood boiled. I didn't yell. I didn't call Victoria to start an argument. Instead, I drove Ethan straight to the top sports outfitter in Columbus. I bought him the finest custom-molded goalie gear money could buy, over $3,500 in top-tier carbon fiber armor. As the shop owner packed the brand-new gear into the trunk of my Ford F-150, Ethan looked at me with wide, worried eyes. "Dad, Mom said you couldn't afford new gear. Did you use your rent money for this?" My heart broke right there in the parking lot. To protect his dignity and keep him from feeling guilty, I squeezed his shoulder and lied. "Not a chance, kiddo. The shop owner is an old friend of mine. He had these in the back room and gave me an 80% discount because of a minor cosmetic flaw." Ethan hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. He went back to his mother's house, believing his father was just a struggling guy who got lucky on a discount, while the woman carrying a $4,000 handbag let her own son play in rags. I let them all believe I was barely scraping by. Because I knew that one day the truth would have its say. While Victoria was busy displaying her $4,000 handbags and showing off her social calendar, I put every ounce of my energy into expanding Miller Precision. Between 2022 and 2023, our quiet shop in Cleveland Heights exploded. We grew to 60 full-time machinists and secured high-margin contracts, manufacturing specialized aerospace fittings and micro-precision components for medical devices. We were working round-the-clock shifts, turning out work so precise that a private equity firm based out of Philadelphia took notice. In March of 2023, I sat in an 11th floor downtown conference room overlooking Lake Erie and signed the final acquisition papers. 20 years of grease, late-night coffee, 4-hour sleep shifts, and quiet sacrifice culminated in a payout of over $12 million cash after taxes. I didn't buy a mansion in Moreland Hills. I didn't buy a flashy luxury sports car. I kept driving my silver Ford F-150 with the check engine light on, living in my cozy one-bedroom apartment on Butler Street. The money was moved into a high-yield private banking liquid account at Great Lakes Trust, the very financial institution where Victoria worked, though she managed standard retail accounts at the Euclid Avenue branch and had zero visibility into high-net-worth private wealth client registries. A few months after the buyout, I attended a silent charity gala at the Intercontinental Hotel for the Children's Health Wing at Cleveland General Hospital. My mother had always loved children, and the hospital had treated Ethan when he broke his arm as a boy. Sitting at a table in the back of the room, dressed in an off-the-rack dark suit, I quietly wrote a certified corporate check for $2 million. I specified 2 strict conditions. The donation must remain completely anonymous, and no brass plaque bearing my name was ever to be mounted on the wall. A senior vice president named Marcus Sterling shook my hand, eyeing me with profound respect, having no idea that the quiet man in the simple suit was the ex-husband of one of his branch managers. Then came a rainy Tuesday in October of 2023 that shattered my quiet world. My mother, Helen, was 71 years old. She still lived in the modest home on Fisk Street where she had raised me, making her homemade pierogies every holiday despite her hands trembling from age. She was the only person in my entire life who had never once questioned my path. "You built something real with your own hands, Frank," she'd tell me over tea. "Your father would be so proud. Don't you worry about what those country club folks think?" When my phone rang at 2 in the afternoon, her voice was shaking, not from age but from absolute terror. "Frank, the doctor just called me back in. My back pain isn't a pulled muscle, it's a severe spinal cord compression." I froze beside my truck, the cold rain soaking my collar. "What are they saying, Mom?" "They're saying I need emergency neurosurgery. Within 48 hours, she sobbed, trying to stay brave. "If they don't decompress the nerve bundle immediately, I'll be paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of my life." "Frank, the specialist team requires an upfront $5 million financial guarantee because of the experimental implant tech, or they'll cancel the OR slot." The ground felt like it dropped out from under my boots. "I'm coming right now, Mom. Don't worry about the money. I've got it covered." I hung up and immediately dialed my longtime accountant, Tom Reyes. Tom had managed my books since Miller Precision was just a rented garage. "Tom, I need $5 million liquidated into a cashier's check immediately," I told him, my voice tight. "My mother has 48 hours before she loses the ability to walk forever." Tom didn't ask questions. "I'm issuing the wire authorization to Great Lakes Trust right now, Frank. You can pick up the printed cashier's check at the Euclid Avenue branch within the hour." I rushed to the hospital to help my sister-in-law transfer my mother into a wheelchair for her preliminary scans. But as I pulled my mother through the glass sliding doors of the main medical building, I didn't notice a black Audi parked near the drop-off zone. Inside sat Victoria's sister, Jessica. Jessica saw me pushing my trembling 71-year-old mother in a hospital wheelchair, my jacket soaked with rain. She immediately whipped out her phone and snapped 3 photos. Within 2 minutes, she posted the pictures directly into the extended family group chat, a chat that included Victoria, Gerald, and Beverly. "Look who's pulling a pathetic pity routine at Cleveland General," Jessica typed viciously beneath the photos. "Frank and his mother are making a scene in the lobby, probably trying to set up a GoFundMe or beg for charity for her back. I bet he's going to pop into Victoria's bank next to beg for a loan extension. Watch out, Vic." 10 miles away at the Euclid Avenue branch, Victoria stared at her phone screen in the middle of her manager's office. Seeing those photos reinforced every bitter prejudice she had harbored for 12 years. Her jaw hardened, her eyes flashing with cruel anticipation. She believed her deadbeat ex-husband was about to walk into her bank to embarrass her with a sob story. She prepped herself for a fight she was determined to win. completely unaware that the man driving toward her branch was holding the financial power to dismantle her entire world. Here is Part 4, The Bank Lobby Confrontation and the Shredded Check. Written as a complete narrative for audio storytelling, tailored to hit the 5/100 character count target with intense dramatic buildup and Midwestern family betrayal. By 8:30 on that dreary Tuesday morning, I pushed open the heavy brass glass doors of the Great Lakes Trust main branch on Euclid Avenue. The autumn wind was whipping off Lake Erie, carrying the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes into the marble lobby. I was wearing my faded canvas work jacket, oil-stained jeans, and my scuffed steel-toed boots, armor from a lifetime of real work. Walking right beside me was my 15-year-old son, Ethan, his hands jammed deep into his hoodie pockets, his jaw tight with anxiety. Near the vaulted glass entrance, my sister-in-law had just wheeled my mother, Helen, inside. She sat trembling in her wheelchair, a hand folded over her blanket, her face pale from the severe spinal pain. I took the thick manila envelope from my coat pocket and stepped into the queue. The lobby was already filled with morning customers, local business owners, elderly retirees, and commuters waiting for tellers. Behind the raised glass window at the end of the counter, a young teller named Brittany smiled nervously. "Next, please," she said, her voice bright but hesitant. "Good morning, sir. How can Great Lakes Trust help you today?" "I need to deposit this cashier's check immediately," I said, sliding the white slip of paper across the marble counter. "It's time-sensitive. My mother has an emergency spinal surgery scheduled, and the hospital requires the clearance confirmation before 2 o'clock today." Brittany picked up the paper. She looked at the corporate logo, then at the printed figures, and then her eyes widened into dinner plates. She blinked, looked up at my grease-stained jacket, and then looked back down at the check. "Sir," she stammered, her voice dropping an octave. This is a certified cashier's check for $5 million. I have to get my branch manager to sign off on an amount like this. It's standard security protocol. Please hold on 1 second. "Of course," I said calmly. "Take your time." I watched Brittany walk straight into the glass-walled corner office. Sitting behind a polished mahogany desk was Victoria. She was wearing a crisp navy designer suit, her hair styled in a tight, flawless bun, looking like a woman who ruled her small domain with absolute authority. When Brittany handed her the check, Victoria didn't look at the account number. She looked up through the glass partition and caught my eye. 12 years of marriage, and she could spot me in a crowded room in less than 2 seconds. I saw her jaw set hard. Thanks to Jessica's venomous text message in the family group chat an hour earlier, Victoria had already written her narrative. She stood up so fast her leather chair rolled back against the wall, grabbed the check in her manicured hand, and stormed out of her office into the middle of the bank lobby, deliberately raising her voice so every single customer could hear her. "What is this absurd circus, Frank?" she demanded, her voice booming off the high ceiling. "Are you out of your mind?" I kept my hands flat on the teller counter, keeping my tone low and steady. "Victoria, it's a legitimate deposit from my private banking liquidity account. It needs to clear today for my mother's surgery. Please just process it." She let out a short, sharp laugh, a cruel, humorless sound that echoed across the room. She turned half sideways toward the line of watching customers, playing to her audience like a seasoned performer. "A deposit?" she sneered, holding the paper up between 2 fingers like a soiled napkin. "You're handing my teller a check for $5 million? You couldn't even make your truck payment on time back in 2019. I had to call you twice about Ethan's hockey fees last spring, and now you walk into my branch in filthy work boots, handing me a home-printed piece of fake paper?" "Victoria, call the account verification line," I pleaded softly, leaning forward. "My mother is sitting in a wheelchair 15 feet away from you. She has less than 24 hours before she loses the ability to walk. It takes 60 seconds to verify the funds. Just 60 seconds. "I don't need 60 seconds to spot a desperate fraud," she shouted, her face flushing with righteous arrogance. "I've been in banking for 15 years, Frank. I know what desperate scam artists look like. You printed this fake prop at home to humiliate me in front of my staff because you can't stand that I moved on to a real life." "Mom, stop it!" the sharp voice cut through the air. Ethan stuttered from beside the counter, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. His hands were shaking, his chest heaving under his hoodie, his eyes wide with anger and disbelief. "Mom, what are you doing?" Ethan cried, his voice cracking down the middle. "That's Dad's money. He paid for my custom hockey gear. He bought all of it. Why are you lying about him?" Victoria turned on her own 15-year-old son like a viper, her face contorted in pure rage, her finger pointing viciously into his face. "Shut your mouth, Ethan," she barked, her voice cold and shrill, echoing off the marble pillars. "You don't know a single thing about real life. Sit down over there and shut up." Ethan froze as if he had been slapped across the face. I watched the last remaining thread of love and respect my son held for his mother snap into dust right there in the middle of that lobby. Victoria turned back to me, a sickening, triumphant smile spreading across her lips. She looked at the $5 million cashier's check in her hands, held it up to the light, and deliberately ripped it straight down the middle. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. She folded the halves together and ripped it again. Quarters now. Paper, ink, and 48 hours of my mother's life shredded into pieces. She opened her manicured hand and let the white confetti flutter down through the air. One jagged piece drifted across the floor and landed directly against the rubber wheel of my mother's wheelchair. "Get out of my bank," Victoria commanded, her voice trembling with cruel victory, "before I have security throw you out into the street." For 3 agonizing seconds, the entire bank lobby was frozen in absolute silence. The white shreds of my mother's surgery funds lay scattered across the polished marble floor like useless confetti, a stark monument to 12 years of unchecked arrogance. My mother was weeping quietly in her wheelchair, her hands trembling uncontrollably over her blanket. Ethan stood beside me, his fists clenched so tightly inside his hoodie pockets that his knuckles were bone white, his jaw locked as he stared at his mother with utter disgust. The heavy-set security guard took a slow step toward me, his hand reaching out to grab my arm to escort me out of the building. Before his fingers could touch my jacket, the heavy glass double doors at the front entrance swung open with a sharp gust of rain-chilled wind. A tall, distinguished man in a tailored charcoal 3-piece suit walked into the lobby, carrying a leather briefcase. It was Marcus Sterling, the senior regional vice president of Great Lakes Trust, the executive who oversaw every high-net-worth account and retail branch across northern Ohio, and Victoria's direct supervisor. Marcus stepped into the room, his sharp eyes instantly registering the bizarre, tense atmosphere. He saw the line of wide-eyed customers frozen in place, the young teller Brittany trembling behind the counter, the security guard hovering over a man in a work jacket, a crying elderly woman in a wheelchair, and Victoria standing in the center of the floor with an air of smug triumph. Then Marcus's gaze dropped to the floor. His eyes caught the scattered white paper fragments near the rubber wheel of my mother's wheelchair. He stopped in his tracks. He walked over slowly, crouched down on one knee, and picked up one of the torn pieces. He turned it over in his fingers, recognizing the high-grade watermarked security paper, the metallic thread, and the distinct gold-embossed private banking emblem printed across the top corner. His face drained of color. He stood up, his jaw tight as stone, his eyes moving slowly from the paper to my face. "Frank?" Marcus said, his voice deep and resonant, cutting straight through the heavy silence of the lobby. "Frank Miller, is that you?" Victoria's triumph vanished instantly. A look of utter confusion flickered across her face. "Marcus," she stammered, stepping forward, her voice suddenly small and uncertain. "Marcus, you know this man? He's my ex-husband. He just walked in here trying to pass a fake $5 million prop check to harass me." Marcus didn't even look at her. He stepped right past Victoria, extending his hand toward me with profound, unfeigned respect. "Frank, what on earth is happening here?" Marcus asked, shaking my hand warmly. "I was just at the Cleveland General Board meeting yesterday. We were discussing the new pediatric wing, the $2 million anonymous endowment you wrote out of your private liquid capital account 6 months ago. I had to beg you just to let us put a small recognition plaque near the elevator bay." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. In that single devastating second, Victoria's entire world disintegrated. Every assumption, every condescending insult, every lie she had fed herself and her family for 12 years crumbled into dust. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her skin turned the stark, terrifying white of fresh printer paper. $2 million, Victoria gasped, her voice cracking as she stumbled backward against the counter. "Private liquid account? Marcus, no. He's a machinist. He drives an old truck. He doesn't have money." Marcus turned around slowly, his expression shifting from warm respect to cold, lethal anger. "Mr. Miller sold his precision aerospace engineering firm to a Philadelphia private equity fund in March for $12 million cash. His private wealth accounts have been managed by our institutional division right here at Great Lakes Trust for over half a year." Marcus held up the torn piece of watermarked paper in his trembling hand. "Victoria, did you just shred a certified $5 million cashier's check belonging to one of our top private banking clients? In the middle of a public lobby, without running a 60-second verification call? I thought it was a scam," Victoria cried frantically, her hands shaking, her composure completely shattered as she reached out toward her supervisor. "Marcus, you don't understand our history. He never had money when we were married. I was protecting the branch." "You didn't protect anything," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register that made every teller behind the counter shiver. You used your position to stage a personal execution in front of 8 witnesses, violating every federal compliance protocol this institution stands for. Marcus turned immediately to Brittany, the young teller who was staring in wide-eyed shock. Brittany, pull up Mr. Miller's institutional master profile on your terminal right now. Issue a direct high-value wire authorization straight to the Cleveland General Surgical Department clearinghouse. I want $5 million transferred within 20 minutes. Do it now. Yes, sir, Brittany squeaked, her fingers flying across her keyboard at lightning speed. Meanwhile, standing near the doorway, Victoria's sister Jessica was frozen in place. From the moment I had walked into the bank, Jessica had been holding her smartphone up, filming the entire confrontation. She had intended to capture her sister publicly exposing her deadbeat ex-husband to post the humiliating footage into the extended family group chat. But her phone had kept recording uninterrupted. Her camera caught every single second. Victoria screaming that Eleanor was dead, Victoria hurling her toxic accusations, the loud tear of the cashier's check being shredded, and then Marcus Sterling walking in, bowing his head in respect, and revealing Frank Miller's multi-million-dollar fortune to the entire room. Jessica slowly lowered her hands, her face pale with terror as she realized she had just documented her sister's complete career execution and broadcasted it directly to their entire family. Marcus turned back to me, bowing his head sincerely. Mr. Miller, I offer you the deepest personal apologies of Great Lakes Trust. This behavior is monstrous, and I assure you it will be dealt with at the highest executive level today. Please, let me personally escort your mother to her transport. I looked at Victoria. She was leaning against the marble pillar, hyperventilating, staring at the floor where the white scraps of paper lay, completely destroyed by the very arrogance she had built her life upon. Thank you. Marcus, I said quietly, taking my mother's wheelchair handles. Let's get my mother to the hospital. By 7:15 the following morning, the quiet surgical wing on the 4th floor of Cleveland General Hospital felt like a completely different world. The rain that had lashed against the windows for 2 straight days had finally stopped, leaving behind a pale morning light that streamed through the glass. Inside Operating Room B, the top neurosurgical team in the state was performing the complex spinal decompression on my mother, Helen. Down in the waiting lounge, the air was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the low, steady hum of medical monitors. I sat on a vinyl armchair beside my 15-year-old son, Ethan. For 6 long, agonizing hours, neither of us said much. We ate cold vending machine pretzels and drank bitter hospital coffee out of styrofoam cups. Around 10 in the morning, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past 48 hours, Ethan slumped sideways and fell asleep against my shoulder, just like he used to do when he was a little boy before the divorce and before the country club dinners in Moreland Hills. I didn't move an inch. I just let him sleep, resting my hand gently over his. At 1:30 p.m., the heavy double doors of the surgical suite swung open. Dr. Harrison, the lead neurosurgeon, stepped out wearing his blue scrubs, his surgical mask pulled down around his neck. He looked tired, but as his eyes met mine, a warm, genuine smile spread across his face. Mr. Miller, Dr. Harrison said, wiping his brow, the procedure was an absolute 100% success. We cleared the spinal compression entirely without any nerve bundle damage. Your mother is in recovery right now, and I can tell you with complete confidence that she will make a full recovery. She's going to walk again. She's going to walk again. I'm a 44-year-old man who built a life out of steel, grease, and hard labor. I don't cry easily, I never have. But in that quiet hospital hallway, as 48 hours of pure terror evaporated into thin air, I put my head in my hands and let the tears flow. Ethan woke up instantly, threw his arms around my neck, and squeezed me so tight I could barely catch my breath. I'm so proud of you, Dad, Ethan whispered, his voice cracking with emotion right there in front of the nurses and doctors. You saved Grandma. You did it all by yourself. While my mother was recovering peacefully in her room, a massive, unstoppable firestorm was ripping through the Moreland Hills social circles. Jessica had intended to record my public humiliation at the bank, but in her panicked, clumsy haste after Marcus Sterling revealed the truth, she had pressed the wrong button. Instead of saving the video privately, she accidentally uploaded the entire 3-minute unedited 4K video file straight into the extended family group chat, a group that included Gerald, Beverly, David, and nearly a dozen aunts, uncles, and cousins across Ohio. They didn't just see a clip. They saw everything. They watched in horrified silence as Victoria sneered at my work boots, screamed at her own 15-year-old son to shut his mouth, and proudly tore a certified $5 million cashier's check into shreds. And then they watched the senior vice president of Great Lakes Trust bow his head in deep respect to the man they had mocked for 12 years, revealing that the deadbeat machinist had sold his company for $12 million cash and anonymously funded a $2 million hospital wing. The fallout was instant and brutal. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang while I was sitting by my mother's bedside. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen on my screen in over 6 years. Gerald. I took a slow breath, slid my thumb across the screen, and answered calmly. "Hello, Gerald." On the other end of the line, the haughty, booming voice of the Moreland Hills real estate tycoon was completely gone. In its place was a hesitant, trembling man desperately trying to eat crow in real time. "Frank, son," Gerald stammered, his breath hitched. I just saw the video Jessica sent around. Frank, I had no idea." None of us had any idea about the company sale, the buyout, or your mother. "Nobody was supposed to know, Gerald," I replied, my voice completely level. "I didn't build my business to impress you at your Sunday dinner table." Of course, Gerald blurted out, trying frantically to put out the fire. "Look, Frank, I'm calling to check on Helen. How is your mother doing after the surgery? If there's anything, any specialist or private room, I can personally pay for." "My mother is recovering just fine, Gerald," I interrupted smoothly, cutting his desperate apology short. "And her care is completely taken care of by the son she raised. Have a good afternoon." I hung up the phone before he could say another word. 12 years of sneering comments about my Ford F-150 and my little machine shop wiped away in an instant. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt a profound, peaceful sense of finality. But while Gerald was trying to save face, Victoria was facing a catastrophe that no phone call could fix. The incident in the bank lobby hadn't just stayed within the family. 3 high-net-worth commercial clients who were standing in line during Victoria's loud performance had been utterly appalled by her behavior. By Wednesday morning, 2 of those business owners had filed formal written complaints directly with Great Lakes Trust's executive board in Chicago, threatening to pull their multi-million-dollar commercial accounts unless the bank addressed the severe misconduct. The corporate board reacted with ruthless efficiency. Fearing massive legal liability and catastrophic public relations fallout, the executive committee issued an emergency administrative order. Victoria's security credentials were revoked on the spot, her corporate email was locked, and her branch managerial authority was completely frozen pending a full forensic risk management audit. In less than 24 hours, the woman who had tried to execute my dignity in front of a room full of strangers found herself stripped of her power, suspended from her job, and facing the total destruction of the corporate career she had prized above her own family. By Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the incident at Great Lakes Trust, the corporate machinery had finished its cold, relentless work. Banks don't fire executives for being cruel human beings or for breaking their ex-spouses' hearts. They don't care about family grudges or 12 years of domestic condescension. Banks fire people for creating unquantifiable legal liability and damaging the commercial reputation of the institution. The internal compliance investigation opened by Marcus Sterling was brutal and swift. They reviewed the security camera footage with full audio, audited the lobby complaints filed by the 3 prominent commercial account holders, and examined the viral digital footprint created when Jessica's video leaked beyond the family group chat into local financial networks. The verdict was unanimous. Victoria was formally terminated for gross professional misconduct, severe breach of fiduciary compliance, and exposing Great Lakes Trust to massive civil liability. Her severance package was revoked, her stock options were canceled under the firm's ethics clause, and her name was flagged in the regional banking registry, effectively blacklisting her from ever holding a managerial position at any major financial institution in Northern Ohio again. Stripped of her executive salary, Victoria's glossy, pristine life began to unravel at terrifying speed. To make matters worse, she had leveraged her future bonuses to maintain the astronomical mortgage on her suburban house and had taken out high-interest personal loans to maintain her lavish lifestyle. Within 30 days of her termination, the financial dominoes fell. On a bright, crisp Saturday morning in early September, the final humiliating blow arrived. A large yellow "For Sale Bankrupt North Sale" sign was driven deep into the manicured front lawn of the house I had signed over to her 6 years ago. The high mortgage payments, paired with severe financial contract penalties triggered by her termination, forced her to put the property on the market at a massive loss just to avoid immediate foreclosure. As movers packed her designer furniture into a rental truck, she was forced to sign a lease on a cramped, 2-bedroom garden apartment out in Elyria, 30 miles west of Cleveland, taking a low-level entry job as a loan processor at a small rural credit union for a fraction of her old salary. Sitting among cardboard boxes in her empty living room, looking at her hand-painted fingernails, Victoria was forced to confront the darkest reality of her life. Her blind arrogance had cost her her career, her home, her reputation, and the quiet, devoted husband she had once written off as a failure. While Victoria was picking up the shattered pieces of her ambition, my life continued in its quiet, steady rhythm. A week after my mother was discharged from the hospital, walking with a wooden cane but completely pain-free. My 15-year-old son Ethan came over to my small one-bedroom apartment off Butler Street. He wore his favorite hoodie, his hands jammed deep into his pockets, carrying a heavy canvas duffel bag over his shoulder. We sat down at my modest wooden kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten quiet dinners alone for 6 years. In the same small apartment with the simple furniture and the silver Ford F-150 parked outside in the driveway. "Dad?" Ethan asked softly, staring down at his glass of ice water. His voice carried that thoughtful, mature weight he had developed over the past month. "Can I ask you something real?" "Anything, bud," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You have over $12 million, Ethan said, looking up at me, his eyes wide with genuine curiosity. "You could buy a mansion in Moreland Hills bigger than Grandpa Gerald's. You could drive a brand new Porsche or a $100,000 truck. But you still live in this tiny one-bedroom apartment. You still drive the F-150 with the check engine light on, and you still wear your old work boots. Why? Why didn't you show Mom and her family who you really were a long time ago?" I looked at my son, the boy who had watched his mother tear up a $5 million check, the boy who had spent years hearing that his father wasn't good enough. I took a slow breath, wanting to give him an answer that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "Ethan," I said gently, "money isn't a scoreboard. It's not a weapon you flash around at Sunday dinner tables to make other people feel small. And it's not something you use to buy respect from people who've already made up their minds about your worth. Real strength doesn't need a loudspeaker, and real wealth doesn't need a designer label." I leaned forward, placing my hand over his on the table. "I worked 18 hours a day in that shop not to prove your mother wrong, but to build something that was mine. And when the buyout happened, I kept the money quiet because money has only one true purpose in this life: to protect the people you love when the storm comes. It was there to save your grandmother's spine so she could walk again. It was there to make sure you never had to worry about your future. Showing off to people who look down on grease-stained hands is a waste of time, Ethan. The quiet stuff is what actually stays with you." Ethan sat in silence for a long moment, swallowing hard as he looked around the small, warm kitchen. A slow, proud smile spread across his face. He reached down, pulled his duffel bag closer to his chair, and looked me straight in the eye. "Mom's moving to that small apartment in Elyria next week," Ethan said quietly. "She asked me to move with her, but I called her this morning and told her no. I told her I'm staying right here with you, Dad. I brought my stuff, if that's okay with you." I looked at my son, feeling a warmth rise in my chest that no $12 million buyout could ever replicate. "Your room's already set up, kiddo," I smiled, squeezing his shoulder. "Welcome home." 3 weeks after Ethan officially moved his things into my apartment, the autumn air in Cleveland Heights turned crisp and sharp. Leaves in shades of burnt orange and deep crimson drifted down onto Butler Street, and the quiet rhythm of our new life felt completely settled. My mother was making steady, incredible progress with her physical therapy, walking around her house on Fisk Street with nothing more than a light wooden cane for support. Ethan was thriving at school, his mind at ease, no longer carrying the heavy, unspoken burden of a broken home. Then, on a chilly Sunday night around 11 o'clock, as I was sitting at my kitchen table reading through a book on mechanical engineering, my smartphone vibrated against the wood. The screen displayed an unlisted number from the Elyria area code. I hesitated for a brief second, took a slow breath, and slid my thumb across to accept the call. "Frank?" The voice on the other end was barely recognizable. It wasn't the sharp, polished, arrogant tone of the branch manager at Great Lakes Trust, nor was it the dismissive voice that had mocked my work boots at country club dinners for 12 years. It was cracked, slurred, and heavy with alcohol and exhaustion. "Yes, Victoria, I'm here," I answered quietly, keeping my voice entirely neutral. A long, trembling gasp came through the speaker, followed by a sudden uncontrollable sob that sounded like it had been held back for weeks. "Frank, I'm so sorry," she wept, her words tumbling over one another in a chaotic, desperate stream. "I'm sitting here in this empty apartment, and I can't stop thinking about that morning in the lobby. I keep seeing your mother's face when those pieces of paper fell by her wheelchair. I keep seeing the way Ethan looked at me. God, Frank, the way my own son looked at me like I was a monster." I listened in complete silence. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't gloat, and I didn't kick a woman while she was at the absolute bottom of her life. "I was so sure I had you figured out," Victoria sobbed, her voice breaking down into raw, painful gasps. "For 12 years, I told myself you were holding me back, that you weren't trying hard enough, that you were just a deadbeat machinist who didn't care about a real future. But I was wrong, Frank. I was wrong about all of it. You built an empire with your own 2 hands, and I was too blind and arrogant to see it. Now I've lost my career, I've lost my home, and my own son won't even answer my text messages. Please, Frank, tell me what I can do to fix this." I closed my book on the table, leaned back in my chair, and looked out the window at the quiet street lamps below. For years, During the darkest days of our marriage and the lonely months after our divorce, I had secretly imagined what it would feel like to hear Victoria admit she was wrong. I used to think it would feel like a grand victory, like winning a bitter 12-year war. But hearing her weeping alone in a small rented apartment 30 miles away didn't feel like winning at all. It didn't feel like triumph. It just felt like closure, a quiet, necessary end to a chapter that should have closed long ago. "Victoria," I said softly, my voice carrying no bitterness, no anger, and no malice. "I don't hold any hatred towards you. I never set out to destroy your career, and I never wanted to see you lose your home. Everything that happened at the bank happened because of the choices we both made, not because I was looking for revenge. I forgive you for what happened to the check, and I truly hope you find peace and rebuild your life out in Illyria. But there is nothing to fix here anymore. This closure is what we both need. Frank, please," she whispered, her voice fading. "Good night, Victoria," I said gently and ended the call. I set the phone face down on the table, let out a long breath, and felt an immense weightless calm settle over my heart. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. By late October, Sunday afternoons in Cleveland Heights had returned to a sweet, simple perfection. My mother came over to my apartment for dinner, walking up the front steps on her own 2 feet. Her hands were still a little shaky, but she spent the entire afternoon in my kitchen making her famous homemade pierogies from scratch, laughing as Ethan tried to learn her secret dough recipe, dusting flour all over his black hoodie. Later that evening, as the sun began to set over the rooftops of Euclid Avenue, Ethan and I walked out onto the small wooden balcony overlooking Butler Street. We sat in 2 folding chairs, wrapped in warm jackets, eating thick deli sandwiches and watching the sky turn brilliant shades of purple and gold. Ethan took a bite of his sandwich, looked out at the street, and turned to me with a quiet smile. "You know what's crazy, Dad? What's that, bud?" I asked. "You had every reason to make Mom pay for what she did," Ethan said thoughtfully, staring at the autumn leaves blowing down the sidewalk. "You could have yelled at her in front of everyone in that bank. You could have destroyed her completely. But you just stood there, got Grandma her surgery, and walked away." I looked at my 15-year-old son, a boy who had grown into a mature, perceptive young man, and smiled. "Ethan," I told him, "it's never your job to punish people who do you wrong. Life takes care of that all on its own. The real victory isn't making someone else suffer. The real victory is sitting right here on a quiet evening with the people you love, knowing you stood by your principles when it mattered most." Ethan looked at me for a long moment, nodded slowly, and bumped his shoulder against mine. He turned back to watch the sunset, choosing to be right there beside his father on a simple wooden balcony. And as the cool Ohio breeze swept through the trees, I knew that everything I had endured, the grease, the 4-hour sleep shifts, the cold Sunday dinners in Moreland Hills, and the shredded check on the marble floor, had brought me to this exact moment of pure, unshakable peace. Thank you so much for joining me today and taking the time to listen to this story of Midwestern grit, quiet integrity, and the enduring power of self-respect. If Frank Miller's journey resonated with you and served as a reminder that true wealth is measured by character rather than flashy labels, please take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment down below and let me know what city, state, or country you're listening from today. I read and appreciate every single one of your thoughts. Until next time, keep your head held high, protect the ones you love, and take care of yourselves out there.